A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support.
It was one of those late autumn afternoons when the world feels like it's wrapped in a warm, amber glow, yet my heart was a whirlpool of conflicting emotions. I had just turned 35, living in a small Midwestern town with my husband, Aaron, who was both my best friend and my biggest support. Despite the laughter and the coziness of our home, I could feel an unease creeping in, pulling at the pit of my stomach, the kind of discomfort that urged me to reach out but made me hesitate at the same time. It was a day like any other, but a thread of anxiety wove its way into the fabric of my thoughts as I sat on our creaky porch with my laptop, fully intent on engaging with others on a subreddit called r/askreddit. I scrolled through various posts but stopped cold when I saw the title, "Americans, how are you feeling right now?" Something about that question felt urgent, like it demanded a response that dug deeper than mere small talk. So, I opened my own post, pouring my heart out into the keyboard, detailing the exhaustion I felt from my job at the local library, the increasing tension in my marriage, and the crushing weight of societal expectations that felt heavier with each passing day. As I hit submit, I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, hoping this would be the place where I could share my thoughts, looking for some empathy, or at least the comfort of knowing I wasn't alone. The replies started flooding in almost immediately, each one resonating with my feelings in its own way, from the woman who recounted her struggles with burnout to the man who lamented how disconnected he felt in a crowded room. I began to feel lighter, the communal nature of our experiences wrapping around me like a familiar quilt. Yet, intertwined in this comfort was a creeping sense of dread. What if I was oversharing? What if someone responded critically, judging my feelings as trivial? This fear stung at my conscience, but I pressed on, engaging in heartfelt discussions, offering my own advice to others who needed it. As the sun dipped lower on the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of burnt orange and purple, I noticed that one user, whose handle was The Watcher, had replied to my post with a distinctly different tone. Instead of sharing sympathy, he challenged me, questioning my perceptions. "How can you feel unfulfilled with all that you have? Some people would kill for that life," he wrote, his words wrapping around my heart like a vice. I felt a surge of defensiveness, my fingers hovered over the keyboard, but something stopped me. The truth was, he had a point. I was constantly comparing myself to others, feeling inadequate and lost. I felt this need to validate my own emotions and experiences, when, perhaps, I needed a bit of perspective, perhaps a little less focus on what others thought and more on understanding myself. As I mulled over the Watcher's comment, something shifted in my mind. I decided to take a step back from the computer and reflect, letting the evening air wash over me like a cleansing breeze. My home, the job I loved, Aaron's warm smile when he walked through the door later that night, none of it had changed, yet I was the one who needed to reframe my thoughts. As I closed my laptop, I realized that I had spent far too long trying to broadcast my feelings instead of diving deep into understanding them. That night, when Aaron returned home, I shared everything, my anxieties about work, the pressure I felt about being perfect, and even how the Watcher's comment had made me reevaluate my life. Surprisingly, instead of the deflection I half expected, Aaron listened with genuine interest, nodding along, even sharing his own struggles. We talked late into the night, feeling lighter with each revelation. By morning, my heart felt a little less heavy, and I realized how vital communication had become in our relationship. I logged into Reddit one last time, ready to update my post with my newfound perspective, confident in my emotions, no longer seeking validation but rather sharing my journey. "Here's the thing," I began typing, "I realized that the weight of our emotions doesn't always reflect our reality. It's critical to acknowledge what we feel, but equally important to communicate and to seek genuine connections." That day was a turning point for me, and, in a way, for my marriage. It highlighted the importance of sharing vulnerabilities rather than suppressing them. True bonds are formed when we dare to be authentic. A week later, I received a notification. The Watcher had responded to my update. "Glad you found clarity," he wrote. "Sometimes, we are our own worst critics. Remember, even in the quietest moments, your feelings matter, and so does your perspective." I smiled, the final words hanging in the air like soft laughter, a reminder that in a world filled with feelings, the simplest act of sharing could lead to a deeper understanding of ourselves, and a way forward into the light. The warmth of the Watcher's response lingered in my mind, a small ember of reassurance amidst the quiet tumult that life often brings. I had spent the past week reflecting on my own journey, a cascade of thoughts swirling together like autumn leaves in a gentle breeze. Before I clicked that fateful post, I felt as if I had been carrying an unseen weight, The burdens of unvoiced struggles had grown heavy over the years, tapering my ability to connect meaningfully with those around me. But the act of sharing, however imperfectly, became a stepping stone to clarity. It was as if I had stepped onto a fog-laden path that, for the first time, began to reveal faint glimmers of light. My mind danced back to the coffee shop where I had first unearthed my vulnerability, one particularly drizzly afternoon when the world outside seemed to echo my internal turmoil. Breathing in the scent of freshly brewed coffee, I had opened up to my best friend, Kate, allowing emotions that had long been eclipsed by the mundane to spill out into the aromatic air. Her comforting gaze felt like home, a sanctuary that told me it was safe to unravel. As I recounted my feelings about not measuring up in a world that constantly seems to require perfection, I could see the understanding wash over her. Kate leaned in, her voice a warm whisper, enveloping me in empathy. "You can't be everything to everyone, and that's okay," she said, a tenderness in her words that felt like a hug. In her eyes, I saw a silent assurance that I wasn't alone, not in my struggles nor my aspirations. This was a critical moment, a fleeting spark that helped illuminate the oppressive gloom I had been harboring. As I scrolled through Reddit one evening, contemplating my newfound clarity and how to apply it to my life, I chanced upon another post in r/relationships. A woman was sharing her story about feeling unworthy of connection, reminiscent of my own nods to worthlessness. Compelled by a surge of solidarity, I typed a response. I told her my story, echoing my emotions as honestly as I could. I felt nervous as I hit send, but also strangely liberated, as if I had just cast a small bottle into an endless ocean, knowing it might never be found but hopeful that it could bring someone else comfort. Days went by without a mention, life churned on, and I immersed myself in daily routines, feeling lighter, yet still searching for more profound connections. One afternoon, while scrolling through the comments on my earlier post, I noticed a new reply beneath a random update. "Your story resonated with me. I always thought I was the only one who felt this way. Thank you for sharing." As I read her words, a warm wave washed over me, igniting a sense of purpose I hadn't anticipated. Each new comment felt like a thread, connecting us in a shared tapestry of humanity, weaving together our vulnerabilities to create something profoundly beautiful. In that moment, I understood that vulnerability isn't merely a personal struggle but rather an anchor, effortlessly binding souls together. I took a deep breath, feeling the assurance of mutual understanding fill the spaces where doubt had once taken root. It was refreshing. I sat that evening, keyboard quietly clacking, contemplating how deep this connection could grow. The day turned to dusk, and outside, the skyline blended into soft shades of indigo, while I connected with others, each word spilling forth stitched with care. Engaging in these discussions, exchanging stories and lessons, turned into a balm for the soul. I finally realized how each interaction, whether in person or online, held the potential for enlightenment, growth, and healing, however fleeting or deep these moments may be. I felt the energy of conversations wrapping around me like a soft blanket, instilling a sense of belonging I hadn't quite felt before. As I prepared to call it a night, I returned to my notifications and paused when I saw the watcher had commented again. "Always remember, when you share your truth, it will resonate with those who need to hear it most. The world might feel quiet at times, but your voice brings forth a symphony." His words echoed in my heart, and I nestled into my pillow, comforted by the realization that we are all threads in a vast fabric, stitching together our stories, each contributing a unique patch to the ever-expanding quilt of life. With these thoughts dancing in my mind, I drifted off to sleep, captured by the sweetness of connection that has the power to illuminate even the darkest nights. The next few days were imbued with a sense of lightness I hadn't felt in ages, like a weight had been lifted from my heart. I found myself waking each morning with a renewed purpose, sipping coffee while listening to the gentle hum of the world outside. The chorus of chirping birds and distant laughter through my window became the soft backdrop to my reality. Each day, I felt a little braver. Little by little, I began to share stories from my life, snippets of joy and vulnerability during casual conversations with friends, each small revelation a brushstroke on the canvas of our connections. It was liberating to just be, to unearth the layers I had buried for so long. I could see them reflected in my friends' eyes, their empathy shimmering like the sun on a quiet lake. Still, I wasn't entirely free from doubt. The weight of my family history hung like a heavy cloak, something I couldn't shake off entirely, and sometimes it felt like a familiar ghost brushing against my thoughts. My mother had struggled with depression before finding her voice in painting, her art an intricate tapestry of her hidden battles, each stroke a testament to her resilience. But still, when I thought of her, how she fought so hard to keep herself afloat, I couldn't help but worry that perhaps I might inherit that darkness, that the threads connecting my feelings to hers might tighten and pull me back. But within that uncertainty, I remembered the Watcher's words, "Your voice brings forth a symphony." So, I decided to reach out to my mother to see if we could find a harmony together. I invited her over for tea, a simple yet symbolic gesture. The warmth of my home combined with the comforting scent of chamomile helped ease the trepidation gnawing in my stomach. As we sat cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by cushions and half-empty mugs, I took a deep breath and began to share my journey, explaining how embracing vulnerability was helping me navigate through my emotions. To my surprise, she listened with open ears, and a soft expression washed over her face. It was as if recognizing her own reflection in my words. Her initial silence was a canvas of contemplation, then slowly, she began to speak of her own battles, the suffocating evenings when inspiration fled, when her paintbrush felt like a stranger. She recounted moments of despair, the yearning to express something deeper that often eluded her grasp, only to discover that the act of sharing her art had been a healing balm all along. That exchange felt monumental, a collective tapestry weaving before us, each thread a revelation and each knot point a reminder of our shared humanity. I saw the flicker of hope reignite in her eyes, and it became clear that while we were mirroring the struggles of the past, we were also carving a new path, one where vulnerability didn't equate to weakness. It was then that I realized I learned from her not just to express emotion but to celebrate it. Over the weeks, we began taking little steps together. Painting sessions flourished into long conversations filled with laughter and shared memories, and our evenings morphed into a sanctuary of discussion, where we could explore the nuances of our experiences. Sometimes, I would catch myself staring at her as she painted, her brow furrowed and lips slightly parted, and for a split moment, it was like a beautiful paradox. She was the artist shaping pigments into colors that expressed her innermost self while being simultaneously my mother, full of love and complexity. Soon enough, we decided to document our strange little journey together. We started a small blog with the intention to share our stories and provide a platform for others navigating similar paths. It felt like we were knitting our patchwork together, not only for ourselves but for a community where we could hold space for each other's truths. The blog gained traction, the words flowed freely as if we were piecing together a beautifully intricate quilt that became an outlet for anyone craving connection. Months later, as I reread the Watcher's comment, I couldn't help but reflect on how the simplest act of sharing had transformed into something larger than myself. By allowing my vulnerabilities to take flight, I noticed not just shifts in my relationship with my mother but a blossoming of connections all around me. Friends reached out, some sharing their own quiet battles, their own symphonies waiting to be sung, each interaction creating a heartbeat of understanding that intertwined our lives in unpredictable yet beautiful ways. And so, here I am, no longer just a solitary thread but part of something rich and intricate. I realize vulnerability isn't merely a doorway to discomfort but an invitation to a greater communion of souls. I still feel that familiar tremor of uncertainty sometimes, but now I welcome it like an old friend, knowing there's beauty in the balance. As I curl into bed each night, I carry the warmth of those connections with me like a comforting blanket, grateful for every thread that has stitched us together in the fabric of life. And if I could once again write a response to the Watcher, I would say he was right. Each voice truly does bring forth a symphony, and our stories, when intertwined, create a chorus that cuts through the quiet, echoing in perfect harmony. I have spent years trying to understand the peculiar nature of childhood, and as I recall a specific memory, I can't help but wonder if it ties into a shared experience many of us overlook. Growing up in a small town, I was raised in a modest home, the kind you could mistake for every other in the neighborhood: cracked sidewalks, faded paint, and large oaks that bend in the wind. My parents were loving but strict, and they often warned me about the dangers of the world, which often felt more like parables for my imagination than lessons for my life. When I turned 5, I remember an innocent afternoon spent with my little brother, Jack. He was just shy of his 4th birthday, brimming with curiosity but still blissfully unaware of his own reflection. One summer day, while my mother was in the kitchen brewing iced tea, Jack wandered into the living room where a large, ornately framed mirror hung above the fireplace. As I caught him gazing into it, his small face lit up with wonder. I almost walked over to him, but something kept me glued to my spot, an inexplicable feeling that if I intervened too soon, I would spoil a moment that felt profound yet elusive. Instead, I watched as Jack reached out, his tiny fingers stumbled across the cold glass, perplexed as if the mirror itself was a portal to another world. I noticed something strange happen when he pressed his palm firmly against it. The reflection didn't seem to mimic him at first, instead, it lingered as if contemplating the boy who called it home. It was unnerving, yet in that childlike manner, I felt drawn to this little enigma before me. It wasn't until Jack laughed and shouted, "Look, it's me," that I felt the chill of confusion slip through my bones. As he laughed, I felt a fondness wash over me, but at the same time, a familiar sense of anxiety about growing up began to claw at my insides. Was there something he was meant to see and understand about his own self that I didn't, or perhaps something I had lost? Days turned into weeks, and each time I found Jack playing with his reflection, it gnawed at me. I began to question my parents, asking about the mirror and why children don't seem to truly see their reflections until they reach 5. They smiled softly, as if amused by my question, but offered no answers, leaving my curiosity to swirl within me. I found myself obsessing over this peculiar phenomenon, sneaking glances when Jack was unaware, desperately wanting to decode this cryptic stage of childhood development. Then one evening, while I was folding laundry in our dimly lit basement, a thought crossed my mind. Was it fear? Did the void of understanding create an aversion to one's own identity? Those thoughts began to wrap around my mind like ivy, constricting slowly as I fought to understand this pivotal time of transition. My anxiety heightened, the stakes felt monumental. I began to feel disconnected from my own reflection, as if Jack's innocence was a mirror to my lost childhood. The months turned into a delicate interplay of emotion, a dance on the precipice of nostalgia and dread. Then on the night before his 5th birthday, I found myself lying awake staring at the ceiling. Reluctance tangled itself around my heart as I went to wake Jack. "Come on, let's look at your reflection one last time before you're officially 5, I whispered. The hallway felt like it elongated as I led him down to the living room, and even the air felt different, charged with anticipation. He stood in front of the mirror, staring with wide, uncomprehending eyes as I introduced him to the boy he would be. "Jack, you're going to see something special," I encouraged, holding my breath. As his fingers brushed over the glass once more, he took a step back, blinking rapidly as realization dawned across his face. "There I am," he shouted excitedly, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a glimmer of understanding spark in those bright eyes. In that moment, I felt a wave of relief wash over me, knowing that what had once felt like a barrier was finally a bridge, a passage into a world I too would have to embrace. Now, years later, I sit on the same old couch, reflecting on that night as I prepare to welcome children of my own into this world. I can't help but wonder what it is they will see, the reflections they will confront, and whether they too will feel that gentle transition from innocence to self-awareness. The journey remains complex and elusive, but I think it's those moments that mold us, the quiet revelations shared in front of a mirror, that help us learn about ourselves, and that's where true understanding begins. Update: since I share this story, I've found silence is often more comforting than words. Recently, as life flows its way onward, I caught Jack across the street, now a teenager with grown-up troubles, standing in front of that same mirror with his equally youthful friends. I didn't intervene. There's something intimate about witnessing that reflection evolve. Perhaps I've become a silent observer of time's gentle but relentless passage, shaping lives in its wake while I smile knowing he'll learn and discover, just like I did. It's a peculiar sensation to watch someone grow, especially when they reflect parts of your own past, yet now carry the weight of their own future. As I stood on my porch, gazing at Jack and his friends huddled around that worn mirror, a wave of nostalgia washed over me, as if the years had melted just enough to let me catch glimpses of the child he once was. Those carefree afternoons we spent playing games, deciphering the mysteries of the world, felt like echoes of laughter lingering in my mind. I remember the day he came running to our yard, his cheeks flushed with excitement, eager to share a tale spun from his imagination, a superhero, a dragon slayer, an explorer lost in the jungle of our suburban streets. He had this knack for turning the ordinary into extraordinary, and I often thought that, at least for a moment, he managed to see himself unblemished by self-doubt. Yet, standing there now, I could see the inklings of uncertainty shadowing his bright features, the way his laughter faintly flickered, replaced by the weight of adolescence creeping in like a slow fog. There was no need to rush in, no urge to guide him back to simpler days. I understood that the mirror in front of him was reflecting a truth he desperately needed to face. Thoughts swirled in my head about my own youth, the challenges I faced in finding who I was, the struggles to communicate my feelings as I bumped against the mirror too. It was a puzzling experience to realize that those reflections, our journeys of self-discovery, were often veiled in complexities we weren't quite ready to untangle. Jack, with his expressive eyes, seemed to be in search of assurances that all would be well, but the reassuring whisper of familiarity would only come with time. I couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride for all those moments shared, knowing that childhood innocence doesn't simply fade but evolves into something richer, something deeper. As twilight descended, painting the world with warm hues, I reluctantly turned away, embracing the simple yet poignant realization that every one of us has a timeline woven with shadows and light. Each person, including Jack, must walk their path, ogling the reflections along the way, cherishing those moments of clarity interspersed with uncertainty. The quiet reminder that we're all continually walking toward our own understanding reignited something within me. I chose contentment over intrusion, instead capturing this fleeting vignette in my heart, a testament to growth that comes from being both seen in those mirrors and in the world. Update: just the other day, I found myself looking into my own mirror, reflecting on this journey both full of joy and marked by challenges, and I thought of sharing this again, to remind all those who might listen that none of us is ever alone. The age we live in, the friendships we create, and the reflections we do or don't see all contribute to a shared tapestry of existence, whispering to us that perhaps the greatest truths lie not just in our own reflections, but in the connections we form and the understanding we nurture within ourselves and each other. In that moment, standing before my mirror, I felt the weight of my years, every line and shadow crafted by laughter, sorrow, and the inevitable march of time. It wasn't just a surface reflection staring back at me, rather, it was a canvas painted with fragments of my life, memories swirling like watercolors, some vibrant, others muted, but all equally valid in the story they told. I remembered Jack's wide-eyed innocence, the way he would chase after sunlight, convinced his laughter could capture its glow. And yet, as I shifted my gaze, I saw my teenage self flickering in my mind, a time overflowing with tumult and discovery, filled with friendships that burned bright and moments of solitude that felt eerily profound. I thought of my own journey through that labyrinth of adolescence, where sometimes, the hardest lessons came from the simplest places, like a mirror reflecting back the truths I wasn't yet ready to understand. It was easy to forget how vital those connections were, how they could serve as mirrors too, showing us sides of ourselves we hadn't embraced yet. I recalled the times I stood alongside friends at school functions, feeling invincible as we posed for pictures, oblivious to how fleeting those moments were, moments where laughter would echo long past their time. In quieter reflections, after falling outs and misunderstandings, I learned about forgiveness and the importance of reaching out, even when the mirror showed me someone I thought I had failed or abandoned. Those reunions, difficult yet necessary, allowed for an unveiling of truths that smoothed over the sharp edges of regret. Life, I realized, was not just about the individual figures we saw in mirrors but about the whole room they resided in, the shared light, the lingering shadows, and yes, the often chaotic noise of living in tandem with others. But now, it felt strangely quieter as I watched Jack navigating the difficult terrain of teenage life, a time replete with identity exploration and endless questioning. As much as I wanted to yell across the street that everything would be okay, I restrained myself. His path, destined to be uniquely his own, was one that required allowing him the space to discover, much like I had to all those years ago. And perhaps he too would come to realize, just like I did, that feeling lost is, in many ways, a prelude to finding oneself. I imagined the conversations he would have with his friends, their reflections mingling in that invisible space like threads twisting into a tapestry, a never-evolving chart of shared secrets and dreams. No longer a parent or authority figure but merely a witness, I relished this vantage point, a gentle reminder of how important it is to return to moments of vulnerability. As day faded into twilight, the street held a soft hue, shadows growing longer and filling the spaces around us with a magic that felt almost tangible. I recalled my own experiences, the times I held back tears behind closed doors and battled insecurities whispered to me by the doubts that percolate during sleep-deprived nights. I resolved then to cherish those reflections in a way that melded love and acceptance, all fueled by understanding. Just like the children who stare into the mirror expecting to see a reflection that didn't yet exist, I vowed to embrace this testament to growth in all its forms. Ultimately, I realized it's that blend of joy and sorrow, the embrace of personal chaos with a slight nod to cosmopolitan silence, that allows us to find ourselves again and again, like some great cosmic dance. My own reflections became threads in the same tapestry where Jack's future would be woven, a reminder that even when we feel isolated in our understanding, connection lingers just beneath the surface, waiting patiently for the chance to merge. And as I stepped back, allowing the weight of those thoughts to settle gently within, I found solace in knowing these reflections, shaped by waves of time and anchored in memory, would remain a part of my ever-evolving exploration of self and the beautiful complexity of shared existence. Life, in all its manifestations, offered us glimpses not only into who we are but who we could become, illuminating paths carrying the hope that never truly fades, even in the darkest corners where we sometimes fear to look. Confession: I've lied about the details of my violent car accident for years, but now, as I sit here in the dim light of my living room, I realize it's a truth I can no longer hold inside. The accident was 5 years ago, and for so long, I've curated a story that's safer and more palatable than what really happened. It started with a late-night drive, just me and the road, an escape from the suffocating confines of my daily life. I was an underappreciated intern at a marketing firm, drowning in the expectations of my demanding boss and the constant competition of my peers. My friends never understood the pressure, their easy lives flashing like bright neon in the rearview mirror as I steered my aging sedan into the night. I told them I was on my way to explore the coast, a spontaneous escape to clear my mind. The truth is, I was trying to outrun an unraveling heart, my thoughts a twisted web of anxiety and despair. The moment the tires caught the gravel on the side of the road, I felt alive, the rush of freedom mingling with a false sense of control over my own chaos. But that night didn't just end with a scenic view, it spiraled into something darker. I remember the headlights cutting through the darkness, the sound of screeching tires, and the sickening impact that followed. I once told people it was a deer that came out of nowhere. It felt easier to blame an innocent creature than to admit I was texting, distracted by my own turbulent emotions. When I recovered, physically, I was a different person. The scars on my body healed, but the ones etched deep within my mind remained raw and pulsating. I longed to confide in someone, to share my guilt, but the weight of my lie became an unmovable stone that I carried with me everywhere, a burden far heavier than I anticipated. Years went by, and life moved on around me. Friends shared laughs and stories, but whenever the accident came up, I clung tightly to the version that had become second nature, a headline I had crafted, safe and sanitized. It became a wall I built to protect myself from the reality of that night. Yet, guilt has a way of creeping in, gnawing at me in moments of quiet when I thought I could forget. I would stir awake, drenched in sweat, visions of bright headlights and the haunting thought of what really happened tormenting me until dawn. I knew I couldn't continue to live like this, the truth was an open wound that needed air. So, I started to write. Little notes, ramblings about my fears and regrets. It felt strange at first, as if words were foreign creatures escaping my grasp, but they turned into confessions, each line a release. On a particularly cold evening, the kind where the wind shrieks against the window panes, I penned a letter to my closest friend, Derek. He had always been my confidant, the one I trusted the most. I spared no detail, my heart thumping in my chest like a caged bird desperate for freedom. With every word, the burden began to lift, and for the first time in years, I felt a ripple of anxiety shift to something lighter. When I handed him that letter, I watched him read it in silence, his brow knitted and eyes wide. When he finally looked at me, all I saw reflected back was compassion, the kind I hadn't anticipated. It was in that moment I realized that sharing my truth was not a weight to bear, but a bridge I had built to the people I loved. His response was simple yet profound, a gentle reminder that everyone wrestles with their shadows, and sometimes they need company. As the days turned into weeks, I slowly started to rebuild my life, not just the life I pretended to lead, but something authentic, grounded in truth. I wasn't entirely free from guilt, but I no longer allowed it to control me. Instead of weaving tales of a perfect past, I embraced my flaws, my imperfections, and the messiness of being human. It was liberating. And while the details of that night will always linger, a reminder of my mistakes, what stays with me is the realization that even in darkness, there is light. I still carry that letter from Derek in my wallet, a tangible piece of acceptance, and it grounds me, connects me to the truth I have finally embraced. Update months later, the other day, I unexpectedly received a handwritten letter in the mail, the familiar looping script unmistakable on the envelope. It was from the driver of the car I collided with that night. To my utter disbelief, she recounted her memory of the event, expressing her own fears and questions. Somehow, in all the chaos, she had been left vulnerable too. All these years later, she wanted to share her story and express her understanding and forgiveness. Instead of the anxiety I imagined, I felt strangely comforted and connected to someone with whom I had shared an experience I had run from for so long. This chapter isn't closed, but for the first time, I'm ready to explore it further. As I sat in my living room, the soft glow of the afternoon sun filtering through the curtains, I couldn't shake the unease that had settled deep within me over the years since that fateful night. The letter from Sarah, the driver whose life had intertwined with mine in a moment of catastrophe, had cracked open a door I thought I had firmly shut. Her words danced before my eyes, my breaths hitching as I read each line once more. I had spent years hiding behind the facade of my carefully crafted narrative, claiming responsibility, absolving myself of the encounter's true weight. I had played the martyr, a hapless victim of circumstances, whilst shrouding the life-altering ramifications my actions had inflicted upon her. While I recounted the details of the accident over and over, how I lost control, how the rain glistened, how an instant turned everything upside down, I had never once considered the perspective of my unknowing parallel. I sank deeper into the cushion of the couch, unable to tear my thoughts away from her feelings, her memories, intricately interwoven with my own. Over the years, I had avoided the truth like a plague. Instead of confronting my guilt, I'd rehearsed a narrative where I was merely an innocent passerby caught in a storm. It wasn't true, and I knew that now. Sarah had bravely taken the step to reach out to me. Surely, I owed her more than a responding silence. As the days passed, an overwhelming sense of clarity began to form within me. I picked up my phone and hesitated for a moment before typing a message, pouring my heart into words I'd carefully woven together, brimming with vulnerability and acknowledgement. I confessed, with sincerity, the guilt that had haunted my nights, the shame that had kept me awake at dawn, and the regret that had seeped into my bones each time that dreaded day surfaced in my mind. I shared how hearing her voice had put a name to the feelings I had buried for so long. Sending the message was surreal, like releasing a balloon into the vastness of the sky, fearing it might vanish forever, but still yearning for it to soar. Would she read it? Would she respond? When her reply finally came, it was as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. She thanked me for my honesty and told me that the road to healing began with sharing our truth. She spoke of the fear she lived with, how the accident forced her to confront a life steeped in darkness and anxiety. The fragility of that moment had changed her, just as it had altered me. Slowly, these conversations began to unravel the tightly wound threads of our pasts. We began to share photographs of ourselves with our families, daily life snippets, and the loves we had found after the wreckage. The more we exchanged, the more I understood the sense of forgiveness she had offered me so willingly. It was as though a lens had shifted, with our narratives no longer isolated catastrophes but rather shared experiences of profound reflection. Through our conversations, I sometimes felt bewildered by the connection we forged not out of bitterness but empathy, a twisted kind of resilience that propelled us forward. Each call unveiled another layer, another crossroads we both faced after that night. I learned about her struggles, how she had to endure rehabilitation not just for her physical injuries but also for the weight of carrying that history on her shoulders. I too began to peel back the layers, confronting the truth that had haunted me for so long, that the accident didn't just shatter her life, it shattered mine as well. I could never be that person full of bravado who soared through life uncontested. I was now a soul marked by loss and remorse. Strangely, rather than feeling burdened by those revelations, I felt lighter, as if Sarah and I were solidifying a bridge of understanding over our shared trauma. As months rolled on, I was surprised at how deeply our conversations changed me. I became more aware of the subtleties of forgiveness, not merely as an act performed in the shadows of guilt, but as a nourishing embrace that healed the wounds we both carried. The day I finally gathered the courage to visit the site of the accident, armed with the understanding that Sarah hadn't just forgiven me but had also welcomed me into a new narrative, I felt her spirit with me. Standing on that desolate patch of asphalt, I was no longer the cowardly figure shying away from my demons, I was a seeker of renewal. I spoke aloud, pouring my heart out to the empty surroundings as if Sarah were right beside me. You were fighting for your life, and I was fighting my own fears. This is a new beginning. The air felt charged with possibilities, the weight of years shedding like autumn leaves caught in a gentle breeze. And so, while I knew that the chapter was not closed, it would never truly close, I could finally navigate it without the chains of my own self-delusion weighing me down. The scars of that night would remain, faded imprints reminding me that life is a compilation of the stories we choose to share. I embraced the discomfort of confronting my past, finally welcoming it and allowing it to take its rightful place in my narrative. Kind of like the air, always present yet often overlooked, vital to my existence and breathing life into the space I now called home. Who knew that a chance encounter with a stranger would lead to a profound healing journey? With the solace of our connection, I stepped forward, lighter, as if liberated from a prison built by years of lies. I understood now that forgiveness could bloom from even the darkest soil, and the truth, while painful, was the greatest catalyst for growth. Update: a few weeks later, Sarah and I decided to meet in person. As the day approached, my heart fluttered with excitement and apprehension. When the moment came and our eyes met for the first time since the accident, That overwhelming connection washed over us like an electric current. We spent hours talking, laughing, and creating beautiful memories. I left that day not just with a newfound friend but with the profound feeling that I had finally taken an autonomous step toward healing, tethered by compassion and understanding. The healing wasn't over, but the journey ahead had never felt more promising. And as Sarah and I continued to share our efforts in moving forward, I realized we were painting new stories on the canvas of our lives, bright, vibrant strokes born from tragedy transformed into hope. Weeks turned into months, and my connection with Sarah deepened in ways I hadn't anticipated. Our phone calls became a cherished part of my routine, a ritual that I looked forward to every week. We would exchange stories about our lives, the mundane ups and downs, the sweet moments of joy, and even the mundane frustrations that somehow felt meaningful in the grand scheme of things. Each conversation felt like peeling back layers of vulnerability, creating a safe space where we shared not just about the accident but about the dreams we still held onto despite everything that had happened. I learned about her life post-accident. She had taken up painting as a form of therapy, using vibrant colors and strokes to express the emotions that words often failed to capture. She sent me a few photos of her artwork, each piece a representation of her journey. One, in particular, struck a chord with me, a canvas filled with a swirling mix of blues and golds, portraying a road that twisted into the horizon, littered with fragments of glass catching the light. It was hauntingly beautiful, a reflection of both chaos and calm, of pain transitioning to peace. And in those moments, I found myself wanting to channel my own healing into something tangible. So, I bought a sketchbook and began to draw again, sketching the outlines of my memories, both troubling and tender, reliving moments that brought bittersweet nostalgia. I was guided by Sarah's encouragement, each stroke meditative, allowing me to confront my fears and embrace the complexity of my emotions. But then, a flicker of doubt crept in. I started worrying if our connection would remain strong as we navigated our separate lives or if time and distance would offer up the same isolation I had felt in the years following the accident. One evening, as I sat on my couch, the weight of this anxiety rested heavy upon my shoulders. I decided to call Sarah, my heart thrumming as if to say, "What if this isn't enough?" As the phone rang, I could almost visualize the warmth of her smile, a beacon of understanding that had been my solace in this journey. When she picked up, we fell into a familiar conversation that began with laughter and moved to a discussion about the challenges each of us faced lately. And then, in a moment of vulnerability, I confessed my fears, about our future as friends, about the possibility of drifting apart. To my relief, she listened intently, her sincerity a reminder of why our connection had evolved into something so meaningful. "We're not just connected by the accident. We're building our own stories now," she said softly, her voice carried by an understanding I could feel in my bones. "And stories can go anywhere as long as we choose to share them." Her belief in our friendship anchored me in a newfound clarity, reassuring me that we could continue to support one another as we moved forward in our separate lives. And with that, I promised to keep drawing and to continue sharing those drawings with her, a promise that felt like an unbreakable thread weaving us together. In those moments, the fear that had once consumed me began to quiet as I realized that the very act of sharing my journey and listening to hers was the foundation we were building upon, a bridge made of our truths, sculpted with compassion. With each passing week, we spoke about various milestones, a promotion at her job, my breakthrough sketch that felt like it captured a small piece of my soul, and the new faces we met in our everyday lives. We celebrated one another's successes, no matter how small, and turned our feelings of isolation into a tapestry of friendship grounded in empathy. Eventually, I even found the courage to organize an event at a local community center focused on creative expression healing for those processing trauma. I invited Sarah to co-host the event, knowing her artistic flair would bring so much life and authenticity to it. The planning process was invigorating, a reminder that I wasn't shaped solely by the accident, I was capable of crafting a vibrant future. On the night of the event, the hall was filled with a diverse group of people, each of whom had their own story to tell, their own experiences to share. As Sarah and I stood side by side, I felt a surge of pride and gratitude for this new chapter in my life. For so long, I had hidden from the shadows of my past, afraid of what lay beyond. But here I was, standing in the light, surrounded by warmth and understanding, not just from Sarah, but from the community we had created. Each person had a reason for being there, a story waiting to unfold, and I marveled at how a horrific incident could blossom into a space of collective healing. As I introduced the evening, my heart raced, but this time it was not out of fear, no, it was anticipation, excitement. I glanced over at Sarah, who beamed at me, her presence an unspoken reminder that none of us had to bear burdens alone. That night, while we shared stories, art emerged from the shadows, creativity flowed from vulnerability, and laughter punctuated the air like music. We could finally see, in the collective narratives shared, that enduring connections could be forged from the debris of our lives, from the very moments that threatened to shatter us. Hope and understanding emerged gently, like dawn breaking through the gray. And as we wrapped up the evening, I felt a renewal within myself, a realization that just as my past had been intertwined with regret, it was equally intertwined with resilience. As I returned home that night, my heart lighter than it had been in years, my phone buzzed with a message from Sarah: "You were incredible tonight. I can't wait to see what we create next." And with that, I smiled, knowing that together, we had woven a beautiful new narrative, one that continued to flourish beyond the borders of a tragic past. Our journey was ongoing, each day a blank canvas, inviting us to add colors of hope, healing, and friendship as we embraced whatever came next. Every night, without fail, the air would grow thick with a heavy silence at precisely 10:52 p.m., as if the world had pressed pause on itself. Living in a small town like Brookshire, this unnerving ritual was an accepted part of life, a peculiar tradition that I had come to know for as long as I could remember. I would watch the clock tick down from my bedroom window, the cool moonlight casting long shadows across my floor, the only sound being the quiet hum of the ceiling fan. It was strange, really, how nobody ever spoke about it, not even in whispers. My parents never bothered to explain why every household, every shop, and even the streetlights would dim or flicker for 12 minutes each night, as if the entire town was collectively holding its breath. I often found myself puzzled, torn between my curiosity and an inexplicable instinct to just let it be, to let it weave itself into the fabric of my life like a long-held family secret. But that fateful summer night, curiosity won, fueled by a restless spirit and an idea that maybe, just maybe, I could peek behind the curtain of this nightly mystery that had haunted me. As I stitched together my plan, the thrill of uncovering a long-buried secret coursed through me like electricity, making my heart race with each passing second toward midnight. Armed with a flashlight and an insatiable need for answers, I slipped out of my room, careful not to disturb my sleeping parents. I stepped onto the cobblestone street, the night air crisp against my skin as I ventured down my familiar lane. I felt the familiar thrill of danger tingling along my spine, but I was fueled by purpose now. My best friend Jacob had always said that fear itself was just an illusion, a construct of the mind to keep us inside neatly wrapped boxes. Tonight, I was stepping out of mine, determined to find out what happened when the clock struck 11. As I approached the town square, I noticed the stillness, the shops darkened and locked, the park benches empty under the blanket of night. My pulse quickened. I had never been this close to the heart of the town during a lockdown. At 10:58, I ducked behind a large oak tree, its gnarled branches dipping low like bent old men in conversation. I could see the glow of the clock tower illuminating the street in soft gold, casting everything in a surreal haze. Then, suddenly, at 10:59, a wave of tension swept through the air, and the familiar flickering began. The town inhaled deeply, and I felt the breath of it rush past me, a wild wind rising but with no sound to accompany it. At 11 o'clock, the atmosphere shifted. I held my breath, straining to see beyond the shadows where the flickering flickered out entirely, leaving only the oppressive darkness draping over Brookshire. My flashlight's beam seemed feeble in comparison as I scanned my surroundings. Then I saw them. Figures emerging slowly from every corner, gathering under the clock tower, their silhouettes merging and morphing into one another like the whispers of ghosts in the night. It was then that I realized the truth of the lockdown. They weren't ordinary townsfolk. They were different. They moved with a deliberate grace that sent chills running down my spine. As I stared in wide-eyed awe, I recognized familiar faces amongst the crowd, my neighbors, the shop owners, even the mailman, yet they wore strange expressions, devoid of any feeling I had ever associated with them. They seemed entranced, their eyes glossed over as they collectively shifted in rhythm, their bodies swaying as if conducting an invisible orchestra. I instinctively backed away, heart pounding in my ears, when I bumped into something solid, a single figure cloaked in dark fabric, its features obscured. I opened my mouth to scream, but panic paralyzed me, turning my voice to stone. That's when the figure leaned closer, a voice like gravel whispering, "If you want to know the truth, you must listen." The world around me melted into whispers, their secrets flying through the air, weaving tales of ancient pacts and sacrifices made to protect the town from the darkness beyond the edge of our small universe. Each night served as a mechanism of renewal, a moment to reinforce the bond between the town and whatever lurked outside our perimeter, a reminder of the fear that kept us all safe. Each of the 12 minutes before midnight allowed the townsfolk to offer up their fears, their regrets, to the void beyond. They would carry the weight of it while, for 12 minutes, Brookshire reclaimed its peace. As the clock struck 11 and the shadows began to disperse, everything settled into an eerie tranquility. I felt the oppressive weight of understanding settle over me like a shroud. I had learned something no one else had spoken aloud, a truth that forced me to see my home in a startling new light. I slipped away, my heart racing as I retraced my steps in the quiet night. By the time I was safely back in my room, shame washed over me. I realized that in seeking the truth, I had stepped away from the comforting lies that had woven the town together. I lay awake long after the clock had chimed again, the town clutching its secrets tight. What would I do with this knowledge? That night, for the first time, I understood the weight of my neighbor's silent burdens, and the following days felt different. I walked the streets of Brookshire with a growing sense of unease, unable to shake the feeling that something was very wrong, and yet so very right about the ritual that I had once found absurd. The updates to my daily life became riddled with reminders of that fateful night, the slight nods from shopkeepers, the knowing smiles from those who had participated willingly, and in those moments, I grappled with the choice between ignorance and understanding. Months passed, and though I hadn't shared this experience with a single soul, I noticed the town changing subtly. The conversations felt deeper, the laughter more genuine, as if we were all carrying the weight of knowledge with us. I pondered often, should I tell someone? Could sharing do more harm than good? In the end, I decided it was wisdom best left as a quiet companion, a ghost story of sorts, a tale that shaped my framework of perception about our collective existence and the invisible lines we draw to stay safe, because perhaps not all knowledge is meant to comfort. And each night, as the clock struck 10:52 and the town would lock down, I would breathe deep, thanking the universe for the moment I had taken a leap beyond the known, and into the deeper layers of what life in Brookshire truly meant. As the clock struck 10:52 every night, a sense of calm and acceptance settled over me, a warm blanket in the chilly embrace of the unknown. The routine had become an intricate part of my life in Brookshire, a place that often felt like a quaint postcard from the past, untouched by the chaos of the outside world. Yet, as the siren wailed and the town fell silent around me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was perched upon the edge of a precipice, gazing down into shadows that danced just out of sight. The first time I had experienced the lockdown, the eerie stillness that enveloped the streets, had been surreal. I was at a late-night study session with friends, the weight of midterms hanging heavy, our laughter spilling into the soft glow of the cafe's neon lights. Suddenly, the cheerful chatter was silenced by that haunting wail, and the cafe owner, a man with kindly eyes and a perpetual smile, turned off the main lights. "Don't worry, it will be over in just 12 minutes, he assured us, but the way his voice trembled slightly as he said it sent a chill down my spine. That first evening, curiosity gnawed at me. What could possibly happen during those 12 minutes that required our town to lock down every night? I began to dig deeper, asking friends and neighbors, weaving through rumors and anecdotes, a silent detective with no plan beyond satiating my curiosity. Most, it seemed, had long since accepted the routine. It was a part of life in Brookshire, whispered about but never dissected. Still, I was undeterred, driven by an insatiable urge to uncover the truth, to reveal the hidden stories tucked between the seams of our town's fabric. Nights turned into weeks, and I collected stories that spoke of strange occurrences, muffled sounds echoing through the air, flickering lights, and sometimes, faint reflections in the windows that vanished when looked upon directly. But no one ever spoke about what lay behind those 12 minutes. Perhaps I was foolish, but I felt a peculiar sense of connection to whatever secret lingered in the shadows. It wasn't until one fateful night that I stumbled upon an old journal hidden in the attic of my grandmother's long-abandoned house. The journal belonged to a distant relative, a woman who had been deemed an outsider in our town decades ago, a name whispered with a mix of reverence and fear. As I flipped through its fragile pages, I felt her despair, her isolation echoing through the years. She wrote of a darkness that had encroached upon Brookshire, a darkness that could not be spoken of openly yet haunted the town's collective memory. Her words were cryptic, but they painted a chilling picture of the past, filled with a sense of foreboding that mirrored my unease. Each passage spoke of the loud sirens, a warning of sorts, summoning the townsfolk to protect themselves from what lay beyond the safety of their homes. Tears pricked my eyes as I realized this journal, once a neglected artifact, now pulsed with urgency, as if the weight of history was begging for acknowledgement. The next evening, I felt compelled to share everything I had learned with the town council. A handful of reluctant faces gathered in the community hall. I presented my findings, my heart racing with the fear of rejection, of being branded the town's nouveau conspiracy theorist. Surprisingly, a gentle murmur rolled through the room, people shifted uneasily in their seats but listened. It was then that Mrs. Haddock, my high school history teacher now with silver streaks winding through her hair, spoke up, her voice a soft echo against the walls. The lockdowns were initially a precaution, she admitted, back when strange things began happening, children going missing, strange lights in the woods. We created protocols, trying to keep fear at bay. The air thickened with unsaid words, the fear we'd all been harboring surged to the surface. It became clear, amid the muted gasps and shifting murmurs, that we had all felt the tremors of something lurking, something unwelcome, and in trying to shield our community, we had silenced the very whispers that could have liberated us. Afterward, a woman approached me, her eyes wary. "My daughter went missing during the lockdown 3 years ago," she confessed, voice trembling. "I just thought it was all a coincidence, a sad part of life, but it was never discussed. All we did was follow orders." In that moment, I felt the weight of the town's collective guilt, a shared complicity in shielding ourselves from the dark while allowing it to infiltrate our lives through silence. I understood, finally, that the knowledge we held wasn't just a burden, it was a catalyst for change. Over the following weeks, I wrote to each of my neighbors, shared stories, opened channels of communication, and we began to speak, not in fear, but with hope. The 12 minutes became a platform for healing. We marked that time by uniting, creating rituals of remembrance for the lost, a declaration that we would not let history repeat itself. It was empowering to reclaim our narrative, to turn shadows into light, and slowly, the sirens transformed from dreadful reminders into signals of resilience. I began to realize that, sometimes, tearing down the walls we build was necessary, not just for our peace of mind but for the collective heart of a town that had been silenced too long. And as night fell and the sirens rang through, I joined my neighbors on the front porch, sharing our stories, reclaiming our past, and building a future free from the chains of dark whispers. The fear transformed into a gentle solidarity, as recognition settled in. That night, as the clock struck 10:52, I took a deep breath, allowing gratitude to wash over me, not just for the truth revealed, but for each soul that dared to be vulnerable, to share a story, to embrace the discomfort that eventually led to our coming together. Little did I realize that this was just the beginning. The nights that followed unfolded with a surprising cadence of trust and connection. Every 10:52 brought with it not just the sound of the sirens marking the lockdown, but the unmistakable sense of unity that had been forged in our shared vulnerability. Each evening, more families joined us on the porch, stories flowing like warm honey, sticky and sweet, their narratives intertwining with one another, creating a tapestry of lives colored by hardship, resilience, and kinship. We spoke of old neighbors long forgotten, of the eccentricities that once defined our small town, and of the chilling events that led to our customs, each revelation a thread pulling tighter around our community, stitching the fabric of Brookshire back together. I discovered Mrs. Thompson had once been a gifted violinist, performing with a local symphony before the lockdown enforced her seclusion, and I encouraged her to play once again. The mournful notes she produced carried a haunting beauty that seemed to echo our past sorrows while beckoning hope towards the future. But it wasn't only the adults who found their voices, even the children, who had previously been hushed by the fatigue of our town's rumors, began to share their dreams and fear, whispers of monsters under their beds emerging lightheartedly transformed into shadows of the unknown that haunted us all. As the days slipped by, I watched the essence of Brookshire metamorphose, the self-imposed barriers that once shackled us fell away, replaced by a sense of belonging that filled the gaps of our lives. Neighbors ventured away from their homes after the lockdowns were lifted, engaging in spontaneous community events. I found myself enveloped in this whirlwind of rekindled friendship, revitalizing not just our town but also my sense of purpose. One chilly evening, after another night of storytelling, we decided to shift the lockdown. Rather than retreating behind closed doors at 10:52, we would share a meal, a simple gathering to acknowledge the passage of time and the strength we had collectively developed. So Friday became our unity night. Candles flickered on tables sprawled end to end across Main Street, laughter mingled with the lingering silence of the sirens that would still wail, serving as a reminder of what we once faced, but also of how far we had come. However, as the weeks rolled into months, I started to feel a peculiar tug at my heart, a flutter of unresolved tension that I couldn't quite place. Every so often, I'd catch fleeting glances of unease hidden beneath the smiles shared over meals. I noticed that each night, some families still chose to stay behind locked doors, as if they held fast to an instinct that warned them not to fully embrace this newfound peace. One night, a particularly fierce storm battered Brookshire, and the sirens howled through the air, mirroring the thunder above. The lights flickered, and after a moment of hesitation, our gathering dispersed, people reluctant but ultimately retreating to the safety of their homes. Little did I know, as I settled into bed that evening, that my fleeting concerns were about to crystallize into something far more real. The next morning, just before dawn's light began to spill across the horizon, a frantic knock on my door jolted me awake. It was Mr. Holloway, the town's old librarian, who looked pale and shaken. He gasped for breath, his voice barely above a whisper as he beckoned me outside. "It's happening again," he said, "you have to see." We hurried down the street, following the shadows of our neighbors emerging from their homes, all drawn together by a mutual fear. The streets of Brookshire felt like a haunted morning, mournful and heavy. As I stepped outside, the atmosphere shimmered with something otherworldly. Our community gathered at the center of town in wide-eyed confusion, murmurs of disbelief echoing the early mist. Then it came, a sudden and powerful shift in the air as a figure appeared at the edge of Ellis Park, bathed in the gray light of dawn. It was an old woman, her face weathered with lines wrapping around cautious blue eyes, an aura that tugged at something deep within me. In her hands, she held what appeared to be a large, brightly painted box adorned with swirling designs reminiscent of the stories we had been sharing. "When the townsfolk forget the darkness that comes after the lockdowns," she called out, her voice surprisingly steady amidst the tension, "the darkness will remind them." A chill pierced the air as she opened the box to reveal strings of delicate memories, old photographs, crumpled letters, and fragments of forgotten lives, pieces of Brookshire long lost and nearly erased from our minds. They danced and flickered in the wind, releasing a wave of whispered voices that echoed through the town, triggering every locked memory of pain, neglect, and fears we had tried to bury. As I watched in horror and fascination, I could feel the energy of the past surging through the crowd, feeding off each individual's shame, guilt, and curiosity for the life they once lived. What does this mean? I wondered, my heart racing between dread and the need for answers. The woman's eyes met mine, and for a moment, the fear evaporated. She offered a knowing smile. "Embrace it," she urged, "and decide for yourselves how to let it shape you." At that moment, I understood what had happened during those surreal nights of sharing. We had built something beautiful in the wake of darkness, a new tradition where vulnerability turned into strength. However, the stories we buried were still there, existing in the fabric of our town, yearning to be recognized. We could no longer lock down our fears nor ignore the consequences of our past. We united not just in declaring our old pain but in acknowledging it together. And so we did. In our newfound circle of acceptance and resilience, we began to share once more. The fears and sadness would not diminish our light, instead, they would guide us towards growth. As the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, the town of Brookshire stood together, brilliant and renewed, prepared to embrace whatever lay ahead while carrying every piece of who we were beneath our shared story. The box of memories became a symbol, reminding us that while we may lock down at twilight, it was the unlocking in the light of day that truly defined our existence. It's funny how a single moment can change everything, especially when you've poured your heart and soul into something that ultimately feels like a grand betrayal. I've been a dedicated fan of the show through the veil since its first season, drawn in by the intricate world building and the intricate relationships between characters. Each week, I'd gather with my small circle of friends, popcorn in hand, eagerly speculating about plot twists and character arcs. The show was more than just a pastime for us, it was a tapestry where our own experiences wove into the complex narratives playing out on our screens. But then came the final season, a season that was supposed to tie up years of storytelling in a satisfying bow. Instead, it felt like the showrunners had taken a megaphone to our cherished theories and shouted, "We don't care." I still remember the day the finale aired, a mix of excitement and dread swelling in my chest. As the hours approached, I could feel the electricity running through our group chat, with everyone sharing their thoughts, their hopes for the characters they had come to love as much as old friends. However, as the credits rolled on what was supposed to be our grand finale, I sat in stunned silence, my friends too, eyes wide. The plot had twisted in the most bewilderingly unsatisfactory manner, characters acted entirely out of character, beloved story arcs were abandoned, and the core relationships that had developed over several seasons were discarded like yesterday's news. It felt personal, like the creators had flipped the bird to all the fans who had invested emotionally and financially in the series. I spent that entire night tossing and turning in bed, the disappointment gnawing at me. Everyone else seemed to shrug it off, chalking it up to artistic freedom, but I couldn't shake the sense of betrayal. I finally decided to write an impassioned letter to the network, pouring my heart out about the discontent amplifying among the fan base. wondering if they understood the consequences of their choices. Deep down, I knew it was just a show, but as I watched my friends spark up the next day about a different series, a hollow feeling settled in. I had hoped that my voice could spark some change, or at least get a response, but instead, I got silence, and I felt simultaneously mature and ridiculous for having staked a part of my identity on a fictional narrative. The punch to the gut feeling persisted for weeks. One evening, I found myself at a local cafe tucked away from the world, nursing a cup of herbal tea, when I overheard two baristas discussing their own feelings about the episode. They were joking about how they had been let down, but their banter soon spiraled into what those characters could have done differently. I felt an unfamiliar camaraderie. Leaning over, I pitched in with my own thoughts, and soon the conversation grew like wildfire, echoing our group's frustration but freeing me from my solitude. People I had never met were validating my feelings, and it struck me that perhaps I wasn't alone in my disillusionment with the show. I posted on a fan forum, seeking a space to air my grief, and found a chorus of voices just as disappointed. We shared theories that could have salvaged it all, and gradually, the weight of disappointment began to lift as we created our own alternate endings. It became therapeutic. Instead of focusing on the betrayal, we forged new paths for the characters and laughed together about the absurdity of it all. Each day brought fresh creativity, a collection of plotlines that would ironically remind us why we love the show in the first place. In the end, though through the veil stumbled, a community emerged, stronger than any one individual, allowing us all to heal and find joy elsewhere. Reflecting on that time, I realized that sometimes the biggest middle finger to fans is just an opportunity, a prompt to explore why those stories mattered so much and to create new worlds together in their absence. Update: a few months later, I was authentically surprised when the showrunners announced they'd be revisiting the series with a special episode based on fan submissions. My heart raced, the mixture of hope and skepticism washing over me, but this time, I approached it differently. Whatever dark corner the show might lead me down, I could, at least, revel in my creative escape. As I settled into my dimly lit living room, clutching a steaming mug of chamomile tea, I could feel a blend of excitement and trepidation coursing through me. After the initial uproar and disappointment regarding the show's abrupt end, the announcement of a special episode rekindled a flicker of the passion I once felt for the characters I had followed through thick and thin. The past months had seen me diving headfirst into fan fiction, sketching scenes, and reconstructing plots that breathed new life into the narrative universe. Each late-night writing session became a refuge, a place where my frustrations transformed into vibrant tales colored with hope and nostalgia. However, the thought of the showrunners finally acknowledging their fan base left me second-guessing my feelings. Would they genuinely listen to the voices of those who felt overlooked, or would this be another misstep, a tempting distraction that carried the same bitter aftertaste? The day arrived when we were told to submit our ideas, and the excitement spiraled into a backdrop of anxiety. I poured out my heart into a story that melded my favorite plotlines, reuniting characters who, in my mind, deserved a second chance, a reunion that carried the weight of unfulfilled promises. I let minutiae roll off my fingers, building landscapes of gripping emotion and unraveling paths that had left me bewildered. The submission deadline passed like a soothing lullaby, and as I waited, I absorbed every drop of hope and doubt that floated into my thoughts. Days blended together, every ping of my phone sent my heart racing, yet returned only updates from friends speculating about the direction of the episode. Months flew by, and at moments I found myself buried under blankets and memories, ruminating about how I might feel when the episode finally aired. Would my favorite characters retain their essence, or would they fall victim to the very fickleness of storytelling I had tried to escape? The day of the premiere arrived like a potent storm, electric and surreal. I paused for a moment at the entrance of my living room, feeling the weight of nostalgia pressing against my chest. I switched on the television, and the familiar theme song echoed, a haunting reminder of what once captivated me. As I watched, the screen danced with images I had hoped for, my submissions were woven like threads into an intricate tapestry, and I felt immersed in the warmth of a familiar hug. In a peculiar yet satisfying turn, they blended fans' narratives seamlessly with their own, elevating the original story while paying homage to what sparked the love in the first place. Each twist, every dialogue sparked joy within me, igniting childhood dreams that lingered just beneath the surface. In true storytelling fashion, the creators took risks that felt authentic, where humor intertwined with heartbreaking moments. I could feel my heart racing in tandem with the characters' journeys, their growth compelled me, igniting a fierce desire to cheer for them all over again. When the credits rolled, I finally exhaled, realizing I didn't just witness the episode, I had partaken in a celebration of community and creativity, a shared understanding that transcended mere entertainment. It was an articulation of everything I had yearned for, dreams woven collectively, which I thought might only ever exist in my notebooks. In the aftermath, I felt lighter as I tossed around ideas among my friends about potential next chapters for the characters. We laughed and critiqued, built and deconstructed narratives with warmth and intimacy, reclaiming the stories in our own ways. The series, which once felt like a betrayal, transformed into a collaborative playground, each suggestion revealing connections that knitted us closer together. As the days turned into weeks, I embraced those feelings of nostalgia without the suffocating grip of bitterness. Instead, I chose to revel in the journey. Looking back on everything, I realized how a supposed middle finger from creators spawned a rich exploration of passion, friendship, and creativity in reclaiming something profoundly shared. I realized, too, that sometimes the stories we hold dear can slip through our fingers, but are never truly lost. They morph into something new, vibrant, and alive, waiting for us to dive back in, ink new tales on blank pages, and create together, like we did. And with that realization, the darkness that once clouded my vision faded, offering a glimpse of endless possibility. Perhaps we are the architects of our stories, even if they're borrowed from the flicker of a screen or the ink of another's pen. With that realization simmering in my heart, I dove into the fan submission process with a mixture of enthusiasm and trepidation. The online forum had become a whirlwind of creativity, buzzing with ideas that both thrilled and terrified me. I spent hours reading how others interpreted the beloved characters, the settings, and the overarching themes that had captivated us, trying to find that spark within myself while grappling with the weight of expectations. Each submission echoed the pads of 1,000 eager feet, pushing against the gates of our collective nostalgia, and I found myself swept up in the wave of brainstorming sessions with my friends. We would gather in my small apartment, the dim light of string lights casting playful shadows on our faces as we combed through our notes and storyboards. We laughed, cried, and sometimes argued over character arcs and plot twists, but at the end of the night, it didn't matter who was right or wrong. We were creating together, breathing life into the void left behind by the showrunners, who had so abruptly disregarded our efforts. Eventually, I decided to submit a story that centered around a character who had long been a point of contention in the series. Once hailed as the most compelling part of the narrative, her disappearance in the latter seasons left many fans disheartened. It felt like a betrayal to cast aside such a rich and vibrant character, and so I chose to give her a tale of resilience and rediscovery, one where she stumbled upon a forgotten part of the world that held echoes of her past adventures. I could see her standing atop a cliff, reminiscent of the courage she had always shown, gazing out upon a vast horizon. Crafting her journey led me to confront my own feelings of abandonment, to explore what it meant to be loyal to something that seemed to have moved on without us. Weeks passed in a flurry of submissions from fans across the globe, a tapestry woven from the threads of different imaginations. I kept checking the updates on the show's fan page, each announcement stoking the fires of anticipation and anxiety. Finally, the moment arrived, the day they would unveil the chosen fan submissions that would shape the special episode. I sat in my living room, surrounded by crumpled pages and used coffee cups, feeling as if the walls were tightening around me as I waited for the announcement. When the clock struck noon, chills crept up my spine, the live stream began to fill my screen, the familiar logo flashing before my eyes like an old friend I had almost forgotten. As the showrunners shared their gratitude for the outpouring of creativity from fans, my heart pounded anxiously in my chest, each beat a reminder of how vulnerable this experience had made me. They began revealing the titles of the chosen stories, and each name echoed my growing hope, a series of breaths caught in my throat. My fingers tingled with disbelief when the host announced my submission, and for a moment, I felt suspended in time. The world outside faded away, the disgrace of the past replaced by a sense of belonging and validation. I had poured myself into those pages, and now, here I was, about to see my words transformed into a living, breathing segment of a universe that once seemed out of reach. The special episode was set to air a month later, but what lingered longer than the excitement was a profound shift within me. I had realized, through the act of creation, that storytelling possesses an innate power, one that connects people across their myriad experiences and fragmented relationships. I had become part of a community that thrived on shared passion, rebuilding something we loved from the ground up. The day the episode finally aired felt almost ceremonial. I gathered my friends once more, this time transforming my home into an impromptu viewing party, the air thick with anticipation and the scent of popcorn. As the episode unfolded, I watched with bated breath. The familiar score began, and with it, a wave of nostalgia washed over me. My heart swelled as my character emerged on screen, her story intertwining beautifully with the beloved narrative threads that had initially captivated us. It was as if our plans had harmonized with the creator's vision, creating something richer and deeper than any single contribution. I realized then that this moment wasn't about vindication, it was about reconciliation, not just with the creators, but with myself, my journey, and the stories I still carried within. And as I sat there, surrounded by laughter and joy streaming through every corner of my living room, it struck me that every ending leaves a space for new beginnings. The series had re-entered my life, not as a hollowed-out remnant of the past, but as a vibrant pulse that beat among us again. It was a gentle reminder that while stories may wane, their essence never truly fades. In our hands, they can always take flight once more. Update: in the weeks following the episode, an unexpected camaraderie blossomed between the fans, the showrunners, and even the actors who began to engage with us once more on social media. It felt invigorating to share in a collective appreciation, to dissect plot twists and character developments alongside those who once felt like strangers. The show had transformed into a collaborative creation, and, as someone who once felt on the outside, I finally felt at home. Together, we filled the void with renewed passion, with a promise that even when our favorite narratives twist unexpectedly, it's up to us to keep pouring our hearts into new stories, continuing the legacy of something we cherished. In the end, my biggest takeaway? That sometimes, the middle finger turns to a high five, and the stories we love are as much ours as they are the storytellers, ever evolving, ever bright.